Alright, the bits are flowing. Looks like we're live. Getting in the routine of setting this stuff up. Forgot to set up the camera. And the port I plugged it into didn't work for some reason. So, what's up? So yeah, it's Tuesday, and coding is my escape, and it'd be nice if I could do it more. So the last couple talks were about this Twitter app, open source, and thinking about how to get people to go onto the Patreon, what kind of value can I give, because really the most value comes from making things open source, because it's better to give than to receive. So I don't know what this stream is going to entail, but I just walked for about 2 hours in the snow, and yeah, I noticed something interesting. All right. So, experiencing an issue doesn't make one an expert by any means. And, of course, everyone's looking for ways to claim victim points. So, are we even going to believe someone who says that they're experiencing it? So playing victim is probably what people think that I'm doing. So most people who are in domestic abuse don't know that they're in it, and they have an idea about what it is, and it's like, well, he doesn't hit me, so therefore not domestic abuse, right? But in a way, domestic abuse, and I'm stealing this from a tweet, let's see if I can pull it up. I think I bookmarked it. It's as much about what's taken away than what's done. So let me get to my Twitter bookmarks. See if I can pull that one up. So something that's interesting that I saw yesterday is during pandemic, young people's brains have aged a lot more than would be expected. I'm just trying to give credit. I could paraphrase and move on. Here we are. When we think about domestic violence only in terms of what is added, violence and danger, instead of what is taken away, safety, self-determination, quality of life, we fail at naming some of the most profound effects of domestic violence perpetrators' behavior on survivor. So, notice the word victim isn't used here. That's a side point. Very important as well. What language we use to talk about this stuff. Like, most people who have gotten out of abusive situations, and also it uses the word violence as opposed to abuse. Pardon the messy writing. So abuse is violence plus power. And violence can be physical, mental, emotional. Emo, that proves it. You're just being emo. So victim versus escapee, survivor. So yeah, people definitely play victim, but you can kind of tell in their language where they're coming from. And then domestic, we also have, say, workplace. So it's interesting, we talk about domestic violence, workplace violence, which neglects the power aspect of it completely in the language. So there's something called reactive abuse. Which is interesting because I feel like this should be called reactive violence. Because usually it'll be someone in a position of power provoking and, just doing violence, which provocation is violence. Even neglect, even messing with sleep patterns by, say, purposely being loud at night and in the morning. So sleep deprivation. So here's a whole nother word, torture. And if we go to the Amnesty International report on torture, there's like 11, what's the word? Characteristics, traits, criteria, requirements, elements. Elements is probably a good word. And each of the elements has a purpose, and there's like kind of an order of escalation. So we really only talk about instances of violence, like a hit. Okay, you've hit, now you're guilty of domestic violence. Technically, yes, but a lot of times people know that we're talking about narcissists or demons. I know a lot of, demon is a really charged word. and reprobate as well. So that's like, reprobate is the biblical word, narcissist is the clinical word, and demon, it's pretty much reprobate, but it's a little bit different in that, you know, legion of demons can inhabit a reprobate mind. So the reprobate is more like tied to the person, and it is like a vessel to let demons in. So on the other side of narcissist, there's empath. And this is a spectrum. So, you know, everyone is somewhere on the spectrum. So everyone has a little bit narcissist, especially in our current culture. You have to be a little bit narcissistic to be able to survive. So, you know, if the highly narcissistic person in power, that's the key element, is power, because it's more focused on the abuse than the violence. Because a person in power can sort of, you know, manipulate a lot easier. Say they are in financial control. Say the lease is in their name. So people think, oh, well, there's shelters for battered women, right? So if it's so bad, why don't they just leave? They can just go to the shelter, okay? So they get there how? With the car? By foot? So if they get by there with the car, then how does the owner of the car get it back? You know, it's possible that he could say, oh, you know, she stole the car. And now, you know, the police go to sort it out, and she says, oh, he was being abusive and I needed to go to the shelter. So this is assuming that there's this mythical shelter that you can go to. So she takes the car, she parks it somewhere. Does she pack anything? Does she shower first? Does she break her normal routine? Does she have child care, pets to care for? Oh, well, if it's so bad, she'd just go and all the pieces will fall where they may and blah, 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 right? So basically what I'm illustrating is that, you know, domestic abuse doesn't look like we think it looks. And in the workplace, I mean, the term workplace abuse is almost laughable, because we all know that more so in the home, in the domicile, the workplace is, you know, a place where you have to be much more narcissistic to survive. You know, it's much more competitive, much more cutthroat and ruthless. So it almost goes without saying that workplace has abuse. But still, in both instances, we talk about domestic violence. And so the person with the power does some mental violence, you know, gaslighting, things like that. They might even say, I don't even want to know what gaslighting means, but it doesn't mean they're not doing it. You know, if they're stonewalling, refusing to communicate, like all of these things too, if they're doing it, they're going to project it onto the person who they have power over, who they're abusing. At least subconsciously, but also if they know what they're doing is wrong, they're going to be doing what? Covering their butts. So, you know, they're going to take all the stuff they're doing and project it onto the person that they're torturing. And so, you know, they're going to be in control of relationships with the extended family, for example. You know, it might be a parent's siblings, it might be, you know, a husband's siblings, etc. And so, you know, there may come a time when the siblings notice a pattern, like, it seems like your son was a little bit beat up and low self-esteem and blah, blah, blah. Huh, it seems like your wife was a little beat up and low self-esteem and became an alcoholic and blah, blah, blah. Huh, it seems like your son who used to be successful is a little bit beat up, low self-esteem, etc. Right? So, nobody's going to know it. And if you start talking about it, then you start, people, it's easier to trick somebody than to convince them that they've been tricked. And so, it's going to be now you're causing drama. You're making waves. Well, you're accusing them of this, so you must be guilty of it. So, the only rational answer is really to not talk about it. And, in terms of, why they're doing it, what they're getting out of it, that's got to be case by case. But I've tweeted numbers about, human trafficking. So, there's one joke that might be my favorite method of passive income is sending my wife to work. Okay, so you send her to work at Starbucks or something. Well, it turns out, I'm getting ahead of myself. So now you're abusing her, you're not hitting her, but you're gaslighting her, you're controlling her with finances, etc. And you send her to work. Now she's, making however much she's making at her job. So does she tell her coworkers that she's experiencing domestic abuse? I mean, does she even know she's being abused? Probably not at first. But then, back to the playing victim thing, everyone in, low class, working class environments knows somebody who is, a fiend for attention and, probably exaggerates a lot. And so, get a bunch of people in a workplace together talking with each other. There might even be competition on who's the bigger victim. So a person who's actually experiencing this kind of stuff, for the most part, is going to keep their mouth shut. So here's another thing too with kids. An indicator of a kid that's experiencing abuse at home is they're going to be extremely mature. They're going to be very introverted, even though that's something that somebody can change for themselves. I'm not saying it's a condition that people are stuck with. But a kid who's being neglected, for example, is going to be hyper independent. So they're going to be, they're going to be commended and everything by the adults in their life. But actually, that's more of an indicator of abuse, because where's their childlike spirit, talking early grade school. So, in some ways, to connect it to the other side of this talk, doing a startup, a person who is or has experienced domestic abuse and has nowhere to return to is in a way the best person to do a startup, because they're hyper independent. They've got hell to return to if it doesn't work out. And if they're in the space to be working on it, it's probably a better space than where they came from or what they have to go back to. And so they're going to be, very unfazed by drama, by stress, by all kinds of stuff. They're probably already masters of living with, shoestring budget. For me, before pandemic, it was totally fine. I was living in my car. I was working whatever jobs I could get, even minimum wage. I was able to save a bunch of money just working minimum wage and still eat extremely well. I went to the best grocery stores. I ate tons of fresh fruit. I ate minimal seed oils. So I did have to go to Taco Bell and eat sometimes, but I got the vegan option there. So I know it is still seed oil there. You know, not perfect, but, you know, the 5 or 1 percentile as far as quality food goes. So, you know, a person who is being neglected, and that's not the only kind of abuse or violence, neglect. Neglect is violence in a way. In the formative years, like, obviously there's adults who choose to associate or not, so that's not exactly neglect. But, you know, if they grow up with this as a child, then they're familiar with it, and it is abuse. Like neglecting your spouse is still abuse, even though they're not a child, for example. You know, refusing to talk about serious issues, never being sober, making false claims about them to the extended family, and then they get angry when these false claims are made, and if they don't express it, they feel it, their behavior becomes off, people feel the vibe. Like, the thing about women too is, like, women might lie with their words, you know, their throat chakra, but you can feel the overall vibe. You know, if you're a sensitive person, you'll see it, but, like, you know, the vast majority of people can't read vibes either. So, you know. So, like, is doing a startup a good way to get out of domestic abuse? So, there's probably a way to do it that I'm not completely familiar with. So, for most of my life, I've used my real name. You know, I was a good corporate worker, good government worker for a long time. And so I had a good reputation under my own name. Now, if you're doing high-ticket, like freelancing, stuff like that, under a fake name, you know, anonymous, you might call it undoxed, there might be apprehension to trust somebody with access to their IT systems, for example. Like, even a first customer, you know, you might be very hands-on with your first few customers. Like, doing a startup isn't necessarily you make the perfect product, you launch it, it gets traction, it goes viral, people start paying you. No, it's more like hands-on for the first few customers until, you know, it's sort of like channel offer fit. So you've got different channels where you have a presence, and then you make your offer to people through these channels. So it might be local service business, it might be online email. So, by the way, startup isn't just a tech startup. You know, it could be a lawn mowing business, etc. But, you know, you can do a startup with a $250 laptop. Can you do a lawn mowing business with $250 worth of equipment? Maybe. Maybe. Your customer base isn't going to be very big. If you live in a city, like the avenues of a city, where people have just big enough lawns and make enough money, then it might swing. But if you're in the suburbs, you know, your range might only be a few blocks. And I guess it's not to say you have to walk around with the lawnmower. You could walk around, get a deal, schedule it for tomorrow or later that day. So it's possible that you could start a lawn mowing business with a $250 lawnmower. And everyone's going to say, oh, I know someone who got, you know, $50 lawnmower, this or that. Like, you know, if the stars align, then it might work out. So you are going to be operating without insurance. So, you know, there's that. It's not going to turn off probably most customers. But, you know, it's just something to keep in mind. Like, there might be implications for using power equipment on somebody's property without insurance, for example. Like, just, you know, if you want to be legit, which I think you should try to be as legit as possible when you're starting a business, that's something to keep in mind. So your $250 might go more or less far depending on what you're trying to do. So, you know, just as far as like, so back to the question of, you know, just going to a shelter as opposed to starting a business. So I'm not sure 100% what I'm drawing. So it's sort of like, how far can you go on, say, $100? We'll call it $10, $100, and $1,000. You know. So if you've got $10, like, you can get on the bus, that's $2. You can get a coffee. If you're gonna leave a tip, that's gonna be $4. If you're not gonna leave a tip, it's gonna be $3. What do? It's better to give than to receive, right? God will provide, right? $4, got a coffee. Now you got $4 left. How are you gonna get home? Well, transfers only last about 2 hours, so you're gonna be spending $2 more on another bus pass, or you're gonna be walking for hours and hours. Like today, I had an errand to run, and I walked like that far, and it took probably 90 minutes. And how far was this? I'm going to use fake numbers, but we'll say from we'll say from 40th to 48th, and then to 52nd. And then this is probably, yeah, it's like a little bit less far that way. But, so, you know, effectively you get, you know, 10 or 15 blocks. So, you know, we'll call it basically, you can go 1 block per dollar that you have. And the coffee would also give you a place to sit for a few hours. And why are we talking about money? Well, doing a startup is ultimately a business. So it's cash in, cash out. So where's your return on your $10 if you start this business? You're sending cold emails? Like, okay, so hopefully someone emails you back that same day. Hopefully you already have an offer ready. Hopefully you already have a channel ready. Oh, you're just starting your Twitter account. Hopefully you have a Twitter account ready. You know, I'm thinking like if I were to start a Twitter account right now, being that it's the holidays, I'd start looking at scheduling first conversations for like early January. Now, we can hope that things go sooner, you know, go faster. But realistically, you know, you can't count on miracles, right? You can believe that a miracle will happen, but you can't count on miracles. And so, you know, to count on it right now, say January, which is about a month out, is when you would, you know, expect it. Your expected return, your expected next step. Now, domestic abuse usually comes to the surface and intensifies during the holidays. So this is probably the most common time that someone experiencing domestic abuse would start thinking about, how can I get out of here? So, you know, realistically, what does an abused wife in a trailer park's savings look like? how far does she have to go to get out of the trailer park? You know? What kinds of businesses can she start? When can she expect to start getting income from that business? You know, it's not the kind of thing where you can just leave for the most part. You know, maybe in 1% of cases that's possible. But then another thing too is if your behavior changes even a little bit, these people are very sensitive and they're very controlling. And so they might start introducing new elements of torture if they start sensing behavior change. Like, they might not know what you're going to do, but it's like something's in the air. You know, I mentioned in the last stream, the end of the last stream where I talked about a stream that I'm going to do, the physics of the physics of narcissistic abuse. So, you know, every person, you know, you might say this is woo-woo, but science has proven, you know, science can demonstrate, it can be measured. That everybody has a so-called aura around them. You know, there's an electromagnetic disturbance that happens. And what else? We're like 80% water. And so if you put like a glass of water with a bunch of dipoles and, you know, magnetic material in it, close to a magnet, it starts being affected. So yeah, it's only on a tiny scale. So it's hard to measure like what people can feel and how it affects them. But we do know that the stronger a magnet, the more current is going through a wire, for example, the further away the field can be measured. So it's a cubic function. So it's sort of like an energy density thing. And so, you know, a person's like raising their vibration, they're getting hopeful that they're going to leave. And now it's hitting their abuser differently. So it's like they can sense that something is changing. They can sense that you're in a good mood. And further, a way that I describe these is creator, and parasite. You know, think about like the golden goose. So the guy with the golden goose, you know, is he treating it good and giving it good conditions and letting it lay eggs as it will and just taking the eggs that come out and being happy for them, or is he trying to get as many eggs as possible out of it? Thankfully the screen didn't go off and mess this up like it has been doing lately. So, you know, it's like one person is putting energy out and another person is taking energy in. And so the person who's taking energy in wants to control the person who's putting energy out and have them put energy out in a way that feeds them, makes them better, makes them look good, etc. So, you know, you start putting away a little bit of money, you start, you know, you're like, okay, now I got, you know, 50, 100, 200, 300, I'm able to get further and further away. Like, your mood goes up. And so, yeah, another thing too is if you're investing this money in building a business, like now, maybe you have, you know, they're probably watching your phone first of all. So, did you buy another phone? And if you did, say like partners or support phone calls, or say you're selling t-shirts, like you don't have to do much there, but you still got to mess with people who get the wrong product or something like that just occasionally. And if you don't, then you're going to start getting like less than 5-star ratings, right? So it starts to hurt your business, and so you want to be like on top of it. Your partner senses that you're a little bit distant, you're disappearing more often, and that's like, maybe they even see your phone vibrating or the screen turning on if it's on silent but the screen still turns on. Or maybe they find the phone. It's like, oh, stop being so pessimistic. Like, just assume that everything will go good. Well, we have to plan for the expected case. Maybe it can go good. Maybe you can sneak it all and get out. That would be great. But, we're just talking about the expected case. What can a person expect? And what realistically happens when someone is like, all right, I'm being abused. I'm aware of it. I'm going to make a plan to get out. I'm going to learn to code. I'm going to get a coding job. Or I'm going to start freelancing. Or I'm going to start selling t-shirts. And then, it's like, this is a long process, You need money to get distance. You need time to get money. And this fantasy that there's just like some battered person's shelter that you can go to. I mean, maybe it exists in some places, but now if you're a man, you're, like me, I'm a man who is totally capable of working, wants to work, has a long history of working, has a great resume, but I experienced workplace violence, non-physical but political. I did reactive abuse, which is calling them out on Twitter after several warnings via email, but they can go to the court knowing that I can't defend myself, file a complaint, show me tweeting at them and say, I'm scared for my life, Your Honor. Oh, I'm changing my routes at work. I'm so scared. I was his boss, even though he's my boss for like 3 days or whatever. Like, obviously, fabricated. But if I'm not there to defend myself, I can't point the obviousness of it out. And so, during pandemic, a lot of stuff got messed up for me. Like, I didn't know that I had... I didn't know that I was neglected, really, or that neglect was abuse. Like, I didn't know what my family situation was like. I just was lucky to get out of it when I was young, and so I didn't suffer the same fate as my brother or mom, who now it's sort of like, And then even talking about that, like now I'm open to... defamation claims being made by the sperm donor. Like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. Like, totally split opinions from people about, most people don't know what reactive abuse is. They only know, like, hitting is violence. They're like, oh, she's so crazy, she, like, pooped in his bed. I'm sitting here like, I know exactly why she did that. Although she has tons of money, so she's not really stuck in any visible way. But I could be convinced that she is stuck. Like, maybe there's contractual obligations, like, I have no idea. Like, I could be convinced that she's stuck, but I'm still left with the question, why didn't she leave? But that's the stereotypical question that every domestic abuse survivor is asked is, oh, why didn't she just leave? Like, you have millions of dollars. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe, maybe she owes all of that money in, like musicians, they can get record deals where they like owe a ton of money. So, yeah, they've got nice clothes and everything, but that's just part of marketing their product, which is them, their music. So, yeah, even in that case, like, why didn't she leave? She's got tons of money. Well, we don't actually know that. But it's like the exact stereotype that every person who endures this is going to have to face. And so, yeah, that's just what I'm trying to explain here. It's like, for me, it's like, why don't you just get a job? Well, it looks like I'm able to and everything, but I'm not able to until I get some court stuff straightened out. Well, why don't you just take your employer to court? How much money do I have? How far can I go? It's the same thing. I did, try not to get too autobiographical, but it's like sometimes you can afford to do one step of a 6-step process, but then because you couldn't complete the first step, when you go to try the first step again, it actually counts against you. So it's not just, it's literally steps back, because now I have to argue why I couldn't complete the first step. And so it's like the same, it's similar, like, so it does damage to me. It's the same thing. Like, say you try to run away with $50 and you get stuck somewhere, and now, another thing too is often narcissistic people have large support networks. So like, say one of his buddies sees you leaving, and we're talking about two different situations. One is you run out, you get stuck with $50. Maybe you're not quite stuck, just to join the scenarios. You're not quite stuck, but you see, a friend of your husband, and he convinces you, oh, why don't you just go back home, sweetheart, da-da-da. And so, like, rather than keep going and say no, and then, like, now you're a blip on the radar, your abuser's buddy knows where you are, So it's like the $50 you had is lost, and now you've got to go home and sleep with somebody who knows, share a house with somebody. I mean, with somebody who knows that, share a bed, share a house, sleep with. I know that has different connotations, so just, share a house with somebody who knows that you literally spent $50 trying to get away from them. So now they're going to be even more controlling, even tighter with money, even more, watching you even more. Like, so your second try is going to be way harder. It's going to require way more planning. Meanwhile, they're also probably going to up the torture, sleep deprivation, constraining your resources, all this and that. And so, basically, if you don't do it perfectly on the first try, it's going to get way harder, if not, your life taken. So it's a high risk thing to just leave, or, just plan to leave, or, So, yeah, I think I've talked this subject out. We're not at an hour, thankfully. We're coming on 45 minutes. So I'll just end it there and think about it. And I do a lot more talks. I'll try to do like a split, one tech talk to one lawfare, domestic abuse, narcissism, like, still an extremely small channel, and I don't have, an audience who's expecting anything in particular, and I've done like 4 or 5 iterations of this channel. So if it were up to me, I'd be talking about tech stuff all the time. Like this Twitter app, I made it, it's open source, and I like to talk about cool stuff like that. And, but at the same time, why don't I work on this? Why am I not all in on this? Well, maybe I'm in a situation where my mind is split. And it's sort of like, if you make 2 goals, you're going to excel in neither. I mean, you might be able to make progress in both, but, that is a generally applicable thing too. Anyone enduring domestic abuse is not going to be able to go all in on a startup or really anything. They're literally being tortured. So I know that sounds dramatic and there's a lot of heavy connotation on it, but torture can be extremely subtle. Just dripping, water torture. Just dripping water on somebody for a long time can make them go crazy. So, yeah. Thanks for joining, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.